layer or the foundational components are the senses, right? And then they integrate, start working together, and we're responding to things, and we're developing responses to how we receive, process that information. Okay. And those responses become building blocks for other activities and brain development and access to higher areas of the brain. Okay. The next level is then sensory motor. So in order for your sensory motor phase to be functional, that bottom, it's essential that bottom phase is working at its best capacity. And then, so there's the sensory motor phase, which is like motor planning and having awareness of both sides of your body and having good postural security and postural control. And when, and I'm going to come top down in a little bit to talk about how attention is sometimes a symptom of what's going on underneath and breakdowns that are in certain areas. And I'll give you specifics about that. Okay. So then there's the sensory motor phase. Then there's the perceptual motor phase, which is when we start integrating more areas of like eye-hand coordination, ocular motor control, like your eyes are controlled by muscles, and those muscles are controlled by other sense centers like your vestibular system and areas in your brain like your cerebellum and whatnot, right? So you look at that. Then there's reflex maturity comes in this high. So reflex maturity comes in, and then we start looking, reflex maturity was early. I lost my place earlier. It's in the sensory motor phase. I should just be talking about this and not looking at the model like do better. I'm getting lost between.
Tell us, because they can't see the model anymore anyway, so you're good. Just tell us.
Oh, okay, good. So, and then we get up into like auditory language skills and language development and visual perceptual and visual perceptual skills and attention centers and function. Then at the very tip of that pyramid, the pyramid's like this big, at the very tip, there's these areas of academic learning, behavior, and activities of daily living, because all of those components require whole brain work, and it requires for our foundations to develop, systematically and talk and integrate with each other and process information in order to respond in a functional way. So when there's breakdowns in particular areas, you see breakdowns in these higher level cognition, language, attention, executive functions, social skills, self-confidence, self-esteem. All of these areas are impacted because this foundation isn't solid. Okay, there's gaps in the foundation, much like a house. If there's cracks in the foundation, then when it comes time to put the hooks, So, okay, so if you want to talk about the pyramid in terms of attention, just for our viewers, and like how sensory processing disorder is different than attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or attention deficit disorder. And okay, so just from a science perspective, for anybody who might be interested, there's actually been research done to show that children with sensory processing disorder, imaging shows that different areas of their brain have processing issues than children who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay, so when assessed, we see that kids who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADD have breakdowns in areas in more of the frontal lobe area and our higher areas, our cortex, whereas sensory processing, it's more deep-rooted in other processing areas that are lower in terms of region of the brains. And we talk about subcortical processing versus like the cortex and whatnot in treatment.
And why, Deb, does it seem like I have ADHD students that I've known, and even Asperger's that have similar sensory needs, it seems like. Why does it seem like it might be the same?
They have similar sensory needs. Well, I think, that's really interesting too, because like who evaluated them? This is kind of the point of, right? So it's like, and quite frequently it's comorbid. So you can have attention deficit disorder because when you think about this brain development And the areas in the centers of our brain are developing over time, and that processing affects brain activity at higher levels, right? So Jane Ayers used to call sensory processing or liken sensory processing disorder to traffic jams within the brain, where areas of the brain that need access aren't getting access because of the processing difficulties, right? So you can understand that they could still present with difficulties in their frontal regions or their cortical regions because they have processing issues in a sensory area, right? But you can still have one or the other. I've never met a kid though who has sensory processing issues that doesn't struggle with attention in some capacity, right? So so a lot of times attention is then a symptom of what's going on underneath the water, and like if you think of like the tip of the iceberg, like it's a symptom of what is actually going on under the surface in terms of like all of these areas of your senses and the sensory motor and the perceptual motor, etc.
Awesome.
So that's why they have similar symptoms. And I think also like our brain uses our senses, and it uses energy and exercise as fuel, right? So a lot of kids seek movement as a natural form of stimulation. So we see a lot of wiggling and a lot of fidgeting and not being able to concentrate, not being able to hold herself or attend in that capacity because they're seeking what their brain needs in order to attend and get regulated. Right? Okay. I think what gets really interesting is when you look at particular things. Like I think when you look at particular parts of development, like I'll just use a couple diagnoses or if you're okay with that. So let's say hypothetically I'm an OT and I assess a child and I identify that they have a postural disorder, which is a type of a sensory processing disorder pattern, which I'm going to be talking about tomorrow night at Empowerment Plans in my group on Facebook if anybody's interested in it. But let's just say that they have a postural disorder, so they can't activate their core and they don't have any core strength or core control. You see these kids and they can't hold themselves upright. So there's a lot of moving, they fatigue quickly, they start fidgeting, their brain's telling them they need more information, and it's perceived as being an attention deficit if it's not assessed properly, when really it's coming from a completely different area of the brain, right? So the treatment is best when you meet the kids with what they need in order to further development and their skills, and then also in order to get regulated and attend to whatever the expectation is.
Right. So that's interesting. Now I want to know, like, are there misdiagnoses for ADHD? But we'll do another one on that. I actually want to ask you now, so what are some, because I love hearing all the science and how it really works, but then I know some people are just wondering, what are some of the things, like strategies they could learn from you, tips you might have for ADHD kids? And again, it's so individualized, as you're saying, and you really need to do a full evaluation probably to decide.
I think honestly, I would definitely, if my kid had attention deficits, I think there's a lot of value in getting an assessment from an occupational therapist just to see and get that whole brain perspective and have sensory processing considered. Because our central nervous system is actually involved, like 80% of our central nervous system is involved in processing, organizing, sorting, and responding to sensory input that we receive. Virtually everything that we learn at some point was received through a sense. We either took it in through our eyes, we took it in through our ears, we took it in through our tactile system, our skin, and the biggest organ on our body, which is often overlooked, which is another reason why a lot of kids fidget and wiggle, because they're not getting the information that they need. They may be under responsive or not getting the information that they need from their tactile system or their proprioceptive system to tell them where they are in space, and They have very, very bad body awareness and spatial awareness. Your vestibular system is involved in that as well. Yeah.
Right. So but Deb, what's the difference? Like if you get a neuropsych evaluation, you're not getting an OT.
No, you're not getting a.
You're not
But
getting
neuropsych, if you get a good neuropsych, they will refer to OT.
They will, if they feel like it's necessary.
But you know what you can do too, if you have a kid and you're concerned that your child has, and this is a part of the reason why I'm developing empowerment plans. This is what we'll talk about later. But because this is a problem, I think that this is, as far as my career goes, people understanding and getting access to OT and the great things that are coming. A lot of people don't even know that this is available, right? Or that this is a potential, you know, treatment modality that could offer a lot of solutions for you know, difficulties your kids are working with. What was your question again?
So, because I was thinking about neuropsych evaluations and how they're great, but I was never recommended for an occupational therapist, and my child was moving around, fidgety, like he had all the typical hyperactive ADHD, you know, markers or whatever you want to call them. So we did a neuropsych evaluation. I know other